Good evening, and welcome to the spring webinar series, Resources for Cannabis Businesses. My name is Natalie Darvis, and I am the chair of the Business Department of Amsterdam University, the first and longest running cannabis college in the world. I'm excited to be your moderator this evening for tonight's topic, the business of cannabis distribution. We are here tonight because the Department of Cannabis Regulation has officially launched the Business, Licensing, and Compliance Assistance, or BLC program, to assist social equity applicants in the city of LA with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This series is part of broader BLC program efforts, which also include live webinars with different subjects and experts, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools you can download and use, and self-directed online education on important topics related to running a successful cannabis business through the BLC's new learning management system, which is usually referred to as the LMS. Please visit cannabis.lacity.org for more announcements on our ever-expanding BLC program. As part of the city's social equity program, DCR has launched a BLC LMS portal where you now have access to these recorded webinars, in addition to online courses and digital resources made especially for you. Information on how to access this LMS will be in the chat this evening. Please note that there is a much longer educational series on tonight's topic that is already live in the LMS. So please check out the series, The Business of Cannabis Distribution, in your LMS portal. Before we get started with tonight's topic, we have a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process via multiple channels. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please ask questions about this subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering them and will be responding to as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A session towards the last 20 minutes of tonight's webinar. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. Chat is available for interaction with other participants. And if you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. And just a friendly reminder, please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic as we will be moving fast this evening. So without further ado, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce you to tonight's subject matter expert, Angie Penuela Ruiz. Born and raised in San Fernando Valley, Angie is a graduate of El Camino Real High School and started her cannabis career after graduating from San Francisco State University in 2015. She has worked with a variety of California operators, transitioning from Prop 215 to Prop 64 compliance across retail, manufacturing, distribution, and cultivation operations. Angie has held key roles through many verticals of the industry, from bud tender to operations manager. A passion for travel and safe access drives her to attend international cannabis events, and she's been honored to share her knowledge in places like Santiago, Chile for the South Pacific Cannabis Cup in 2018. Angie specializes in distribution and manufacturing best practices with an emphasis in education and relationship building. While serving as an advisory board member for the Social Impact Center, Angie currently works as the Director of Industry Relations at the cannabis inventory management software company, Distro. Throughout the pandemic, Angie spent most of her time Zooming with licensees throughout the US, visiting facilities, improving workflows, and engaging in the cannabis community. Good evening, Angie. How are you?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here tonight.
We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Let me go ahead and queue up the slides and we'll go ahead and get started because I know we don't have too much time to dive into all of this material.
Yes, and we're really excited for a Q&A session.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started on the business of cannabis distribution. So I'm going to go ahead and review kind of what we're going to go over today. So move our faces over. Okay, so we're going to be reviewing the distribution business models and the role in the supply chain, kind of just going over what distribution means in general, having a better understanding of the business practices and the role that it has within the cannabis supply chain. The startup requirements, cost, and revenue, because it's always a good idea to understand kind of what it's going to take in order to open up a distribution license, and also kind of have a good idea of what it looks like, to have a healthy distribution license. And the scope of the distribution opportunity. As Natalie mentioned earlier, all of this material is going to be recorded, and there is also additional material available in the DCR's learning management system if you guys are looking to get some more education on the topics. All right, cool. So let's get started. The distribution business models and the role in the supply chain. So in general terms, when we talk about distribution, we're talking about sharing products, whatever it might be, sharing things with other people. When we're talking about distribution as a business, we're mainly talking about someone getting materials or products from a producer and then distributing those materials to a retailer to get to the end consumer, or whoever that might be. When we're talking about cannabis, however, the distributor has a little bit more responsibilities. I know in this visual here, we see the producers pointing to the distributor and then the distributor pointing to the retailer. But when we talk about cannabis licenses, we're also going to see arrows pointing back to the distributor. For a few reasons. So the distributor, as a cannabis distributor, you want to make sure that you are collecting all of the cultivation taxes that come from your producers, from your cultivators, and that get carried on with manufacturers and so on, and remit that to the state, as well as your excise tax from your retailers. And that's the distribution's role. That's something that they absolutely must do. In addition, they're also in charge of testing and final labeling requirements and so on. So they do have a lot of additional requirements and responsibilities that they'll see. So what is cannabis distribution? So in general, like cannabis distributors move biomass. Biomass in for those of you who don't know, are like cannabis products or harvested material and in bulk. They're able to move other things as well, not just that, but products between licensed commercial cannabis facilities. So they are, however, the only license type that is allowed to move items between all of the different other license types that you have. So with labs, with retailers, with other distribution licenses, and so on. So you do have to make sure that the distribution license exists. Those are very important role. The two different types of licenses that we have are going to be the type 11 distribution license and the type 13 transport only. There are a few differences between the two though. The type 11 distribution license, as I keep saying, is the only one that you can get your testing done with. And that is, like I said, a requirement, and is the only license holder that can go ahead and do the the certificate of analysis testing that is required by the state. The transport only license, you'll see a little bit more often with cultivators or manufacturers, or maybe someone who has multiple licenses that wants to go ahead and transport goods in between those license types, but they don't have the ability to do the certificate of analysis testing. So you don't really have as much opportunity there. So the role in the supply chain, so distributors are the link between producers and retailers, and they play a key role in consumer safety. So, as we've mentioned, they move products between licensed facilities. They're in charge of, storing product, arranging for the lab testing that's required. They do the product assurance review prior to it going out for testing, and also prior to it going to retailers. And of course, in charge of collecting all the taxes, whether that be the excise tax or the cultivation tax. So let's talk a little bit about business models within distribution. For those of you who don't know, a business model is kind of just like how you make your money, right? There can be a whole bunch of different types of business models. The most common way that you'll see people make money with the distribution license is going to be with distribution fees that they collect from their cultivators and manufacturers, right? So with let's say a retail license, the business model would be getting products from a distribution and then marking that up to sale for retail. With the distribution license, it's going to be a little bit different. For the most part, you're going to see percentages and, like I said, distribution fees. And then you'll also maybe see some diversifying with distribution with different services that they offer. So different business model features. I'm going to kind of get into a few of these real quick. So high exposure to product related risk. A lot of times people don't realize that as a distributor, you're taking control of other brands, materials, other cannabis goods that are not necessarily in your ownership, right? You're responsible for it, but it's not necessarily yours. And that is a huge risk that not everyone remembers. And there's also like insurance implications with that as well. Very thin margins, especially right now when we're talking about gas prices and how crazy those have been lately. That's definitely making an impact on your guys' profit margins with the distribution company. It's super difficult and like, it's not difficult, but the pricing adds up really quickly when you're thinking about distribution costs, because there's so much that goes into getting that product to the retailer and to the consumer. So just keeping that in mind, there are very thin margins. And retail stores do have limited shelf space. We are looking at being in this market for, I want to say over 3 years now. I don't even remember what year we're in right now. But there are very much developed brands that exist that have kind of shelf space and kind of have that hold. So it's very competitive and difficult to get your guys' products in on shelves. Required competencies. So I'm going to kind of go over this in a number of different ways. These are all kind of the requirements in addition to having a license that you want to keep in mind. There's transportation, warehouse, logistics, inventory management, metric and accounting. Metric is absolutely required. It is the seed to sale tracking system that we have in the state of California. Accounting and bookkeeping and cannabis product knowledge. So all of these have varying weights, but at the same time, you can have all of these and not have anyone to implement them. So keeping in mind that it's really good to have people who are on your staff that have an understanding of warehouse logistics and inventory management in general, who maybe have past experiences with accounting and bookkeeping, because it's not just for you to have an idea of how your business is doing, but you're also required to keep a lot of additional paperwork and just information around that you're able to give back to the brands that you are distributing for. There's a lot of money that's moving around in a distribution license, and I will say specifically just moving around constantly in a whole bunch of different ways, and it's really important to have people who kind of understand what they're doing and can go ahead and keep control of all of that that's going on. Cannabis product knowledge is also extremely important. Being extremely passionate about the distribution or business model that you guys are kind of going for, and having the knowledge of the products that are kind of like in that are in hype at the moment, and not just that, something that you can actually continually have on your shelves or be able to distribute. Something that I don't see here as well is just kind of the relationship management that you have with your team and also with the brands that you have. Over and over again, I've just seen, you can have all of this, but you don't necessarily have the relationship management skills with the brands that you're working for or working with. And it's really just, it's an ecosystem. So making sure that you're working really closely with them and understanding kind of the difficulties that they're facing at the moment and so on, so that you can help them and kind of also diversify your guys' business model. All right, so talking about that, let's go ahead and get into startup requirements, costs, and revenue. So outside of licensing, so outside of how much it costs to have your license, you also have to make sure that you have your facility, vehicles. Software is absolutely a must, especially with the distribution license. You can get away with not necessarily having all the software with other license types, but there's so many additional requirements outside of metric that you're required to have. Software is definitely a helpful tool to have as a distribution license, and always talent. There's a lot of people out there that are looking to get into the cannabis industry, and you don't necessarily, I mean, this is my personal opinion, you definitely don't want to pay like the lowest amount and just find anyone out there. It's really important to do your homework and double check all the references and try and get someone that has experience in the roles that you're trying to fill. I definitely recommend. But startup requirements, so facility, vehicle, software. I'm going to go back to facility really quick because a lot of people don't realize this once they're starting the licensing process. You do have to pay your rent in the time that you are not operating. So keep that in mind. That's a huge cost that people don't necessarily think about or remember, and the licensing process can be lengthy. Okay, so facility requirements. I would love to say that I have an answer or that there is an answer to the exact size and space that you need, but it's really just going to depend on your business model and what it is exactly that you're trying to do. I think we can get more into this in the Q&A if there are specific questions, but it's really just going to depend. Are you looking for a location that is going to be like, is your business model looking to service a specific type of business, or are you guys looking to do a specific region? Then you might want to consider, there's a whole bunch of things to consider there. So it really just depends. And I would say that there are requirements as well for the facility that you're looking for that are specific to your guys' area. So like the 600 feet requirement, you just want to make sure that you're looking into if the area that you're looking in is zoned correctly. Another note here, which is also usually more money, is you may need to make facility improvements. That's something that happens pretty consistently. You shouldn't underestimate at all whatsoever improvements that need to be made on buildings. That happens all the time. Electrical, making sure that if you are going to have, over a certain amount of employees, you got to make sure you have your bathroom set up and everything needs to be up to code. So just making sure that's something that you're keeping in mind if your building does need to have any updates. Vehicle requirements. So you are going to need to lease or own a vehicle, absolutely 110%, because you're a distribution license. And there's very specific requirements that you need to adhere to when you're looking at that distribution vehicle. Once again, like we mentioned before, there may be updates that you need to make to that vehicle. Some of the requirements that are really base are going to be the GPS equipped transport. So just making sure that you're able to say at all times where that specific van or vehicle is, and any type of additional software or hardware, which would be something like tablets, maybe some type of a computer inside of the distribution vehicle. I've seen people go as far as even to have a printer, just to make sure that in any case they're able to print manifests and things like that. So how much does it cost? Well, like I said before, with finding a facility, it's really all going to depend. You're going to make sure that you're finding a secure location. You got to make sure that you're paying rent or possibly a mortgage, depending on if you own the facility or the location. And you have to do that all before you even receive a license. And you also want to most likely at some point start paying to have retain really key members a part of your team, whether it be marketing or sales, your inventory manager, people like that, your chief of operations, whoever it might be that's going to be a part of your startup team. And then of course, making sure that you have your vehicles lined up. That is something also that people forget to do early on, and it's kind of a hunt to find vehicles. So making sure that you start early and trying to find those vehicles is very much recommended. All right, so let's talk about different revenue sources, distribution fees, the product sales, and different business services that you can have. So what I've seen as the main source of revenue for distribution businesses has been in the fees that they collect from their license holders. So depending on what services they go ahead and offer, whether that's handling or storing product, or maybe just transporting specific goods from, a different distributor to a retailer or another distribution license, depending on what that agreement is. Typically, though, distributors do make a percentage on the wholesale value of the products that they do transport. That percentage is constantly changing. I have seen a range. I wouldn't want to say right now a number because it does consistently change, especially as we see gas prices changing and especially as we see the market consolidating. This is always going to vary, and it's also going to vary on the services that distribution provides, right? So product sales and other business services. Some distributions, they don't just, do last mile. They don't just do delivery. They don't just handle your testing. They also do your sales for you. So they have an additional sales team that focuses on selling your products for you. So you don't necessarily need to have that sales team. Or maybe they provide other business services. So like packaging or sales and marketing material. I've seen full services, and keep in mind that is also going to be a cost, because if you are going to be, let's say, having a whole print shop out of your distribution license as well, that costs something, and it's also upkeep. But it is also a revenue source, as there are a lot of small businesses who don't necessarily have, the money or the resources or the community to go ahead and start their brand, and you can provide those services. So major operating costs, I know we keep reviewing it, but the facility lease, that can be extremely costly and very much vary. Just make sure that you guys don't get into a strange situation. Make sure that you guys are doing agreements, no handshake agreements anymore. You want to make sure that lease is secure. Your vehicle costs. So depending on if you're planning on just distributing locally or if you want to distribute all throughout the state, you might have to have multiple vehicles. That does have upkeep costs. There's insurance that's a part of that as well. So just remember that. Labor isn't cheap, at least it shouldn't be. There's amazing talent out there just looking, for opportunity. Definitely pay them well, guys. It's very much worth it. Software can definitely range on costs. Just throwing it out there, I don't really know necessarily a cost, but I can give you guys some pointers and tips. Always make sure that when you are looking for software, that they can show you that they have an excellent metric integration. And they're kind of going to cover the things that you guys need the most. Always come with a list of questions of things that are very difficult for you guys on a day-to-day basis. And if you don't know what those questions are, you can go ahead and demo a few softwares and kind of figure out the questions that you need to ask. Or reach out to like a local community organization to help you out with that. But definitely ask and make sure that this is a software that is actually going to help you guys out with your guys' operation. And then marketing. We are in California. This is a lifestyle brand state. Marketing is super important, and especially with the limited shelf space. And, us being a little bit more of a developed market at this point, there are brands that already have, that hold on the market, and you want to have awesome marketing to be able to get to the masses. Distribution profit margins. Okay, this one's a little bit tough. So they are, in most industries, small. In the cannabis industry, it's very much typically small. So you're looking at about 10 to 15%. The limitations on revenue is really just all of the costs that's involved in operating a distribution license. It's a lot more than we think. Like, it costs a lot of money to have a distribution license. Sometimes I kind of joke around, and it's like, do we have distribution licenses or do we have print shops? Because we're printing all the freaking time. So your profit margin, what does that really mean? For those of you who don't know, because I didn't actually know this previously, so it's probably good to kind of define it. But that's going to go ahead and be the offering. So the cost to provide and how much you charge your customers for them. So if a business has high profit margins, that means that their products or services don't cost a lot to make, but they can charge the customers a lot of money for them. In distribution, however, the opposite is usually true, because it costs, sorry. Okay. The cost to move and transport cannabis merchandise, it adds up super fast. And the fees that distributors charge and are able to make are, like we said, extremely limited. You can capture more with services and launching your own brands, which is another really key thing. Other than services, marketing, sales, whatever you can come up with, something that you guys are really passionate about outside of distribution. You can also launch your own brands, which also helps significantly. So the scope of the opportunity, let's go ahead and look at kind of what we've discussed this far and see what makes sense. So for cannabis distribution, there are definitely some barriers to entry. We've talked about how much it costs, the licensing in general, and kind of what that takes. It is a lot of work that it's just a lot of work. The location restrictions, that is also definitely something that I see as a barrier to entry, as well as kind of the difficulty in finding locations that are something that's reasonable for you to be paying for during the licensing process. And of course, the economies of scale, which essentially at its base is, right now, the cannabis industry is consolidating. And we have a lot of distribution licenses that have already taken a big hold of our market at the moment. And they have scaled to a certain point that they're able to continue to make a certain amount of money, but they must continue to scale. And there is actually a certain point where you can scale too big and kind of like fail, but that's not the goal here. So just keeping all this in mind, there's a lot of benefit that comes to having a distribution license, but it is kind of difficult to get into it. The competition, so like I said, the market share is consolidating amongst a group of operators. We're starting to see this happen really often. I've seen it happen over the last year and a half or so. Especially as larger emerging distributors are coming out, they're getting into the space. They have a pretty good portion of the distribution business with the top selling brands that we're talking about. There's also a number of vertically integrated operators that have been expanding their distribution network and also have the shelf space because it is their own, that are very competitive at the moment. And of course, there are always the growers and manufacturers that have options to either get their own license or work with those bigger distribution licenses. Okay, so underserved needs. So talking about different opportunities that we have, there are niche brand houses, services for other license holders and launching your own products. There's a lot that we can kind of discuss here, and there's a lot of opportunity. You just have to be super creative and passionate about what you're doing. So brand houses, maybe you want to specifically work with a number of licenses that are, women owned, or maybe you want to work with you only want to distribute other equity brands. There are successful business models that are following that. It just really depends on something that you guys find that you're extremely passionate about and that you will find happiness in doing every single day. And then services for other license holders. Just being as creative as you can to come up with different services you can offer. Maybe you have someone in your family or someone that you work with or someone that's a part of your network who's just an amazing graphic designer and can bring anyone's brand idea to life. Well, with that, and maybe someone who knows how to write amazing agreements or partnership agreements or white labeling agreements, whatever it might be, you can work together and have a distribution license that also provides these additional services. And then launching your own products. I love seeing when distribution licenses do this. Usually you'll see in the beginning, people will work with other licenses. They'll kind of build up the revenue that they need in order to launch their own products and start a little small and grow into something really amazing that's specific to the community. So that's always another revenue source that you guys can tap into. When we're looking at growth options, so let's just say that you launched your distribution company and everything is going well. How is it that you can continue to grow your business? I feel like I kind of just went over that, but adding brands, working with retailers, doing educational events is a really awesome way to work with growing your company. Cannabis, in my opinion, it sells itself. It's really just about educating the consumer and making sure that they know what products they're getting into their hands and creating that relationship with the plant that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So, PADs, which is an opportunity for you guys to go into the retail store and do patient education days and stuff like that. That's also something that's something I would recommend. Expanding your service territory. Now you got to be careful with this one. You want to make sure that you're scaling at the accurate time and making sure that you can actually, service these other territories. Just because I've seen it go south. So it is an option, but you want to do it in a scalable way so that you guys will be successful, and then make sure that you're actually servicing those brands that you guys are working with. Launching your own branded products, that also helps. It kind of puts some skin in the game. It makes you a little bit excited to play around with it. And if it's something that you're super passionate about and you see certain market trends because you are working with these other brands and you think you can bring something to the table, absolutely. And it's just another way for you to continue to grow. Adding cultivation, manufacturing, and retail licenses. I always recommend that at some point. Vertical integration is definitely helpful. Having other partners and sources, being able to bring in, your own cultivation or your own material, your own cannabis material is super helpful. Being able to manufacture your own goods. Now at the distribution license level, just so that you guys know, you're able to distribute products. You're able to package flower, so goods like that, eighths, grams, things like that, and you're able to make pre-rolls, but you're not allowed to do infused pre-rolls or anything like that. You need a manufacturing license for that to be able to produce that type of product. So if that is something that you want to diversify in, maybe you're super into extracts, you might want to get a manufacturing license so that you can go ahead and create those products and distribute it to other manufacturers that you've added to your supply chain. And there's also always new states coming online. I work a lot with other states like Oklahoma, there's Oregon, there's always opportunity in other places for you to bring your brand or even launch with other brands that you're working with. Okay, let's look at the market. Market power will continue to consolidate. That's just something that I think we see in every industry. We can definitely see it if we look to the alcohol industry. There's only major player distributors, and then there's of course the niche distributors who distribute the smaller alcohol that we see. But there is a strong possibility that we will continue to see the market consolidate. There's also cultivators and manufacturers that have the distribution options, to go ahead and add the distribution license themselves or to work with multiple distributors, which I will say I have seen that become a thing more often, working with multiple distributors and kind of just figuring out what's best for your needs, depending on if it's local or if you need something that, needs to happen all the way in Northern California, depending on where you are. Fully integrated operators who are going to prefer their own distribution license always and handling their own distribution in-house. But as long as you make your services more valuable, self-distribution does start to look a lot less attractive because it is a lot of work. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for having me, and let's go ahead and get into the QA.
Thank you so much for that really awesome information session on distribution. We have some really great questions from the audience, so let's just go ahead and dive right into it, Angie. The first question is from Emiliano. You referenced software a lot in tonight's webinar, and are you referencing maybe standalone software or software as a service? And I think perhaps Emiliano is wondering, is it one software that you're going to be using or one type of software that you'd be using as a distribution company? or would it be a whole suite of different software
Yeah,
services?
absolutely. It really depends on where you are in your growth as a distribution license. And I talk about it a lot because it's not something that I've seen everyone think about immediately.
Mhm.
But we're probably talking about a suite. I don't want to say anything in specific, but accounting software is something that you definitely want to have. You can get away with using Excel for a little bit and having that internal, but it gets to a point where it's not manageable, it's not
Yeah.
scalable, and then it's not really something that your brands want to see invoices from. They're trying to get information and reporting from some type of an additional software. Of course, you have to use Metric. You don't have to pay for Metric. We pay for that in our licensing fees, but that is something that you do have to use. At a certain point, though, there are specific requirements that you have as a distribution that Metric doesn't necessarily do for you. There is no invoicing capabilities inside of Metric. Other than invoicing, there are specific required documents that you have to keep if you are deciding to do, in-house light manufacturing. If you are going to go ahead and package cannabis material, you do have to keep, batch production records and things like that. Those are not necessarily something that you get out of Metric. So having that software, once you get to that point, really helps once, for a lot of reasons, to scale the business, but then also for auditing purposes.
Great. So it sounds like, I mean, with Metric, I think that our attendees have learned this a lot in other webinar series, that Metric is not business management software. It is a compliance tool. It is in place for regulators to be able to track and trace the location of cannabis goods throughout the supply chain. But a lot of operators are going to need many different software solutions for a bunch of different functions within their business. And those particular software solutions are going to be dependent on the license type that you have. And it sounds like when it comes to distribution, probably a big consideration would be an inventory management software solution.
Yeah, inventory management, depending, of course, on your business model, you may have a business model that you actually don't hold inventory. All you're doing is last mile distribution and fulfillment. So if that's the case, you might not necessarily need anything crazy there, but you might need additional software to track your drivers and for routing and things like that. But yes, depending on your business model, you would probably at some point need an inventory management system or some type of an ERP. We did mention like having additional services like sales and things like that. Well, it's very, very helpful to have some type of a system to help house all of that information so that you know who you're supposed to be contacting and you have something for your sales reps to kind of go to for home base. So it really just depends on your business model.
Absolutely. You mentioned last mile. Can we just define that for our audience, just in case people are not aware of that term?
Yeah, of course. So let me think of how to define this. So last mile distribution would just be not necessarily doing the testing and all the other fun requirements, but just taking the products, the finished goods from the distributor or wherever it is housed currently to the retailer and dropping it off. Just doing the fulfillment of the product, not having any additional requirements. Of course, there could be additional requirements depending on your guys' relationship with that brand or whoever it is that you're working with, but it really all depends.
Great. And I've also heard retailers use last mile as well to describe that last little bit of time to get the product into the customer's hand. And that especially comes up in cannabis delivery. And next week, we're going to have a whole webinar on the business of cannabis delivery. So we'll definitely be exploring that topic a bit more. Yeah. Great. So our next question is from Margaret. And apologies if I said that name incorrectly. Do you have any information on a budget for facility improvements? If you don't, that's fair, but maybe just expand a little bit on some of these facility improvements for specifically for a distribution license. What might be some facility improvements?
Okay, so it's really, I hate that every answer is that it just depends, right? It always, yeah. I hate that. I wish I could give you guys something really solid, but unfortunately, it always just depends. So depending on what your facility is looking like, And depending on what activities you plan on participating in as that distribution license, you will have to make, updates to your facility, whether that's updating the floors, whether that is doing an entire repainting job to make sure that I forgot exactly the term, but to make sure that the paint is like the microbial.
Oh, it's resistant to resistant to like microbes. Sure. Yeah.
All of that.
It seals in the whole room.
It seals in the room. Like, it really depends on what it is. Or you have picked a facility that it was the last facility that you can possibly find. It is zoned properly. The landlord's freaking awesome, but you need to redo the entire facility and put in air ducts and make sure that it's up to code with local regulations, and then also somewhere that you guys can operate in. So it really does depend on how the facility is at the moment.
Yes. Yes. And I think you brought up a good point. I think a major consideration in a facility improvement is always going to be HVAC, so heating, ventilation, and cooling, because you're storing cannabis goods, and cannabis goods are not stable indefinitely, and they oftentimes require climate control in order to preserve their freshness over time. So as a warehousing entity, as a distributor, you're probably going to have a pretty solid HVAC system in order to preserve those products.
Yeah, and just for reference to you guys, you can look at the regulations, and there are specific rules as to like the temperature that the rooms that you store cannabis need to be at and things like that. I'm not personally a contractor. I'm not sure, but I know that there is those requirements.
Great. That's great info. We have an attendee from Floating Fox Company, and they had a question for you, or two questions actually. Do distributors typically have exclusive relationships with brands? That's our first question.
Once again, like it depends. Typically, I want to say it really just depends on. It depends on the person and the relationships that they have. We are a heavy relationship industry and community, right? As much as people don't want that to be the case, it is the case. And especially in California, I see that being the case. So I would say that you do see the relationships being extremely important, but it's really going to vary on your business practices, because even if you have, the greatest relationship in the world, but you are not fulfilling the needs of the brand and doing what they need in order to be on shelf space, or give them the reporting that they need to know exactly where their material is in the supply chain, or any news on it, then you will most likely lose that brand. So it's really just dependent on the situation, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, exclusivity, you think, comes with really best-in-class business practices as a distributor?
Absolutely. And that may not have been my answer 2 years ago, but as we've seen the market change and people underdeliver, we've seen this change a lot.
That makes sense. And I think that question makes a lot of sense as well. If we're talking about, we did bring up the alcohol distribution model tonight, and we do see that in alcohol, that there are brands that are exclusively only carried by one distributor in a lot of markets. So I think, the key is to do a good job distributing these brands' products.
It's to do a good job, and then just keep in mind that the consolidation that's happening, there's a lot of ownership between licenses. So depending, maybe there's additional interest within the distribution license and that specific brand at this point, because of the way that they've helped each other grow over the past few years. So that's always something to keep in mind as well.
Yes. All right. The next question is, should new brands focus their sales outreach and strategy on first pitching dispensaries or distributors to carry products? That's a really good question. So I'll say
one more time.
Yeah, one more time. Should new brands in cannabis focus their sales outreach and strategy on first pitching dispensaries or first pitching distributors to carry their products?
Okay, so I think it's distributors.
Okay. And you might be biased towards
I
that.
might be biased.
Yeah.
I might be biased. I think it's okay. Let's say it's both. like every answer, but I want to say it's distributors right now, just because a few reasons. Okay, so the distributor right now, because you can go ahead and go to a retailer and do your absolute freaking best, do your absolute best as a new brand and try and get them to taste your product, whatever it might be, call them, bug them, whatever it is. But that distributor already has that relationship with the retailer.
Yeah.
They already have it. And as long as you're working closely with that distributor and make sure that the drivers and the people who are actually that distribution that you're going to work with is actually talking to the retailers and, wearing your lanyard and doing those things, I actually think that's a little bit more impactful right now. Just because
I think it's a great answer.
Yeah, there's like a flood right now, I think, of new brands, and it's really hard to get everyone's attention. But if you establish that relationship with the distributor and you just have them present it in a specific way and just, talk it up a little bit, I think it's a little bit easier to get in the consumer's hands that way. But like I said, I'm a little bit biased, and I'm sure you can do both.
Yeah, and I think that this question is a really interesting one, because it really spotlights the changes we've seen in the cannabis market from, the medical cannabis era in the state of California and now, because people used to be able to make products and communicate and sell them directly to retailers, but the sort of influx of the regulations around distribution has really kind of changed up how sales model happens for all producers, be it cultivators or manufacturers. So I think that having a solid sales strategy with a distributor or several as a new product launching in the LA market would be very smart. All right, next question is from Jovi. How do you find adequate talent and potential business partners you can trust when you have no experience in cannabis? So Jovi says that they have experience in compliance and policy, but no experience in cannabis. I think we're going to focus this question on distribution, because that's Andrew's area of expertise. So how do you find adequate talent when you're starting a new distribution company? And how do you find, potential business partners for a new distribution company?
Okay.
Best advice.
Best advice when it comes to hiring talent. I would definitely rely on whatever local community that you're trying to hire in, like going to events and also participating as well in any, what are they called? Hiring fairs. Yeah. Because that actually really helps. And the people who are really driven to get a job, they show up. I used to be one of those people. I still am. Highly recommend. And then really, I hate to say like vibes, but on top of vibes, you really just got to make sure that you're checking their references. And when I'm saying checking their references, I mean, you are calling every single reference that they have. You're checking with other people in the community and seeing if this person has, a good reputation in general. And if you don't have that community, I promise everyone will take you with open arms. Just show up to something. Like, I promise, everyone will take you. But I guess that's kind of my recommendation. There are awesome services. There are cannabis specific
recruiting services.
Yeah. If you don't have the budget for that, it's not necessary. And honestly, depending on where you are in your growth, I would look to other industries as well. There are people who are currently looking to, change up their lives. It's been kind of a crazy few years. And they come from these awesome industries that have had it together way longer than we have. And they can come in and kind of make a huge impact. So even if they aren't necessarily involved in the cannabis industry, you definitely don't want to hire them for your metric admin. But if it's inventory management or anything like that, definitely giving them the opportunity as well. When it comes to metric hiring, specific to distribution, I would rely on using a service to find someone who is good for you, just because there's a lot of people out there who say that they know what they're doing and they might not necessarily know. I wish that there was I wish there was a resource for me to give you like a list of questions and say, okay, these are the questions that you ask a metric person, and if they answer a certain way, don't hire them. That would be an awesome resource to provide, but I don't think there is one right now. It's just, double checking for sure. Now, when it comes to like business partners, that's really hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a really, really tough question that I personally wish that I had the answer to, but really making sure that you guys, it's just vetting people and making sure that everyone's on the same page and understanding of how difficult this process and lengthy this process is, and that there will be no return on investment until years later, until the license is actually in action, and finding someone who's just accepting of that.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, someone who has kind of the same, absolutely the same morals as you, and someone that you're not going to have a problem working with, or explaining to other people that you're working with this specific person, or have investment from this person, or whatever it might be. Just kind of doing your research on that. I wish that I had the answer. I personally have been burned myself, so I have no idea.
I think that most people have been in the cannabis space a long time, like we have learned a lot of lessons around business partners. And I think, one thing that we could point to is that in the learning management system offered by the BLC program, there's a lot of information in there about business planning, organizational development, and there's a lot of information about all the specific types of agreements that you're going to need. So, definitely vet potential business partners, but also make sure that you structure your entity correctly, and take Angie's advice on how you search for these people.
Yeah, searching, and then also the agreements. Absolutely gone are the days. I don't know if they existed for anyone here before. Gone are the days of the handshake agreement.
Yes.
No, we do not do that anymore. We make agreements, and it's worth it having someone go over those agreements and making sure that you're safe, no matter what, no matter how comfortable that you might feel. Put those agreements in place. This is a business, and we want to be here for the long run.
Yes, great advice. All right, next question is from Emiliano. The purpose of GPS in transportation is more of a need to know where a product is at any given time, or will this data need to be captured and documented or archived for reporting requirements? So I think, to summarize, Emiliano is wondering, is GPS only used for real-time data capturing, or is it also part of records retention for a distribution license?
Yeah, so for a distribution license, the only time that I've really seen it be brought up for like record retention purposes was for police investigations after the fact. So I think it's really just to make sure in that point in time you know exactly where your product is, where your driver is. It's not just about your product, it's also about your employee safety. Things happen. So I to my understanding, that is what it is. And whatever GPS service that you guys are going to be utilizing, I know for a fact that they do have, they keep that information housed for you, so that if you do need to go back and see whatever information it is, that you're able to do that. And if not, that's a question that you want to ask the software company to make sure that it's something you can do. But to my understanding, it's just for tracking purposes in that moment in time, to make sure that everyone's safe.
Great. I love that response. And I think if you're looking for some more detailed information on GPS and especially delivery, attending our webinar next Tuesday in the business of cannabis delivery will be really helpful. All right, as we're starting to wrap up this evening, this was a bunch of great questions from the audience. We so appreciate it. I'd like to close with you this evening and ask you, Angie, what advice do you have for these new entrepreneurs in the social equity program in the great city of LA?
Well, congratulations on being here, one, for even like taking the time to try and learn as much information as possible, because you'd be surprised how many people don't. So yay, congratulations on that. The advice, just to my core, I really believe that you just need to be you and do what is going to make you happy and the community around you happy. So whatever ideas that you have, whatever drives you every single day, I'm probably weed, but if it's something else, that's totally cool. Maybe it's art, maybe it's some type of community passion project, whatever it might be, include that in your everyday practices because the industry definitely needs it. Aside from that, don't give up. I know it seems like a lot of work. It is, but it's definitely worth it. And the industry thanks you for all of your work because we need definitely more representation, especially in the state of California. But LA, we need to represent. See, besides that, don't be afraid to reach out to any resources. There's a huge community here for you. There's lots of nonprofits in Los Angeles. There are people like myself and other people in the industry who are just, happy to answer whatever questions they can to help you. So never be afraid to ask questions, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. But yeah, I think it's,
I love that.
I think
Yeah,
it's
and speaking of contact, I believe some people are looking for your contact info. So whatever you feel most comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to put that in the chat.
Yeah.
And Angie, this was so great. Thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it. Lots of great info, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I got a few announcements for our audience.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So thank you so much for attending this webinar this evening. And the full course for this topic is already available in your LMS for you to get more detailed information on tonight's subject. Many templates are also available for you to use to support your business planning efforts in this LMS. And during the month of March and beyond, these webinars are happening Tuesday and Thursday evenings. This upcoming Thursday on March 24th from 6 to 7 p.m., the topic will be contracting with Knox and Ross Law Group. Next Tuesday, March 29th from 6 to 7 p.m., we're going to have our next installment in our business series with Robert Fierro of OnFleet delivering an informative webinar on the business of cannabis delivery. Followed up closely on its heels will be the business of cannabis manufacturing with Dr. Stephanie Gongano on March 31st. I also have some other info I'd like to share. So before you leave, please fill out a brief survey to share your experience tonight. We are dropping this link in the chat now. We really appreciate your feedback, and we will use it to fine-tune these webinars moving forward. The DCR encourages licensed cannabis businesses to hire local, transitional, and equity workers. If you are a social equity licensee, you can also sign up to receive small group and individual coaching on workforce development. Social equity employers need to assess, increase, or develop your workforce. There's going to be free human resources coaching for equity licensees. Sign up to receive individual or small group mentorship specific to your needs, as well as learn how to recruit, hire, train, and develop your team while fulfilling LA's good faith hiring requirements. And so to register for this free personalized workforce development coaching, there's going to be a link dropped in the chat right now. The city of Los Angeles also has good faith hiring requirements for all licensed commercial cannabis businesses, and the city has created a survey to collect information related to these requirements to gain an understanding of the challenges faced by licensed businesses. And we're going to use this info to also inform future educational programming. We're only asking licensees to fill out this survey once for every one of their locations, and we're asking for this to be filled out before April 1st, 2022. You can visit the DCR website to learn a lot more about these good faith hiring requirements. And there's an FAQ document, and there will be a link for that document dropped in the chat right now as well. Also, this Friday, March 25th, is going to kick off our series of one-on-one business assistance sessions for the following social equity participants. Even if you don't know what direction you're going in your licensing process, you can come into these information sessions to learn more about these subjects. So starting this Friday at noon, from noon to 1 p.m., we have patient and consumer safety for staff. This will be for staff, managers, and all licensees. We're also going to have subject matter expert Tiffany Watkins for that. From 1 to 2 p.m., we're going to be looking at retail operations. This will be best for managers and licensees looking to start a retail business with Maha Hawk. From 2 to 3 p.m., we're going to have delivery operations for managers and licensees with Robert Fierro. From 3 to 4 p.m., we're going to have distribution with the lovely Angie, who we just met this evening. And this particular one-on-one session time will be best for managers and licensees. And from 4 to 5 p.m., we'll have manufacturing operations with Dr. Stephanie Gangano. And this one, again, is good for managers and license holders. So on behalf of the Department of Cannabis Regulation, thank you so much for attending tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.